Welcome to the storage provisioning demo for OpenAdmin tool for Informix. With the Informix storage provisioning feature, you can avoid out-of-space errors by having the database server automatically manage and expand storage space as your data storage requirements increase over time. This demo will show you how to use and manage this feature in OpenAdmin tool or OAT. OAT has a centralized place for managing storage and space usage on your database server. This storage page is located under the Space Administration section of the menu. On the left side of the storage page, you will see a tree that lists your database server name at the top. Mine is called Chicago. Below that is a list of all of the data spaces for the server. When the database server is selected, as it is now, you will see 5 panels on the right that provide you lots of detailed information about space usage on the database server as a whole. You can also click on any of the spaces in the tree to drill down and get detailed information about a specific space. Looking at the panels on the right, you will see an information panel. This panel gives you a graphical visualization of space usage on the database server. Next to that is the Tables and Indexes panel. Expand this panel to see even more detailed and graphical information about space usage for all of the tables and indexes on the database server. This panel is also where you will find actions such as compress, uncompress, repack, shrink, and defragment. On the bottom is the Spaces panel that shows all of the spaces on the database server. Expanding this panel is where you would find actions such as add space, expand space, and drop space. Similarly, the Chunks panel is where you'd find all the chunks on the database server. Expanding this panel leads you to actions such as add chunk, extend chunk, modify chunk, or drop chunk. But the focus of this demo is really the storage pool, so let's expand that panel to learn more about storage provisioning. In configuring the storage pool for your Informix database server, you provide a set of directories, cooked files, and raw devices that the database server can use, if necessary, to automatically expand an existing storage space. As you can see in the table, my storage pool is currently empty. So let me show you how to add an entry to the storage pool. First, I provide the path to the directory cooked file or raw device. Then I specify the size for this storage pool entry. I'm going to leave mine as extendable, but I can also specify a fixed size or a fixed ending offset. I also have control of the minimum size of new chunks created out of this storage pool entry. I can also set a priority to tell the database server which storage pool entries to use first when there are multiple. I can also review the SQL that OAT will use to create this entry before I click Add. So now I have space sitting in the storage pool that the database server can use when necessary to expand an existing space. So let's see how this would work. From the Spaces panel, I can see that my space, called DBS2, is completely full. I can see this in the % used column, where the blue bar graph for that space shows 100%. So what would happen if I were to load data into this full space? Informix would automatically expand this space so that the data load could continue without out-of-space errors. Let's try this now. There are a couple of things that we'll want to note before we start the load. One is that DBS2 is currently 1 megabyte in size and is completely full. The second thing to remember is that DBS2 currently has only one chunk. I am going to use OAT Schema Manager to load data into DBS2. I have a bunch of call log or call history data stored in a text file. I have created an external table interface to this file. I am now going to load the data from this external table into a regular table that resides in DBS2. With this call log table in DBS2 selected, I can go to the Actions menu and open the Load wizard. I want to load the data from my previously defined external table. We want to submit this load task now, and we'll have to give it a name. Okay, so now OAT has started the task that loads data from my external table into the regular table that resides in DBS2. So let's now go back to the storage page to see what's happening. Take a look at the Spaces panel. DBS2 is now 11 megabytes in size. So the database server automatically expanded the space by 10 megabytes when we tried to load more data into the space. This allowed the data load to proceed and complete without getting an out-of-space error. If you also take a look at the chunks pod, you will notice that the space DBS2 was expanded by adding a second chunk to the space. We can see that the second chunk came from the storage pool because the path says pool chunk 1, which was the path that I added to the storage pool earlier. Now let's briefly discuss the two ways that spaces can be expanded. Spaces can be expanded by either adding a new chunk from the storage pool, which we have just seen, or by extending existing chunks. In order for existing chunks to be extended, they need to be marked as extendable, which you can do through OAT. Another thing that I can do is that instead of waiting for an out-of-space situation to occur, I can manually extend chunks or expand spaces at any time. When I manually extend the chunk, I can tell the database server how much I want the chunk to be extended by. Just like for chunks, I can manually decide to expand spaces at any time. When expanding a space, the database server will decide whether to extend an existing chunk or to add a new chunk, although the OAT wizard gives me some options for giving a little guidance to the database server. There's one last important point to discuss about storage provisioning. So far, we've talked about two ways of expanding space using the storage pool. In the first instance, we had the database server do it automatically, but it did so reactively only after the space was full. Secondly, we talked about the DBA being able to manually intervene to expand spaces. But there is a third option that is both automatic and proactive. So let's go back to the storage pool panel. You will notice some settings called automatic expansion configuration. Here's where I can tell the database server to automatically and proactively expand the space when its free pages fall below a specific threshold. Using these settings enables you not only to use space effectively and ensure that it is allocated as necessary, but also reduces the time you need to manually monitor your space and determine when you'll run out of free space and where. Instead, you can just configure the database server to do all of the monitoring and proactive intervention for you. I also have the option to configure the wait time, which is how long transactions will wait on the database server to complete expanding a space before returning to the client with an error. This concludes our demo. We have seen how you can configure the Informix database server to expand space automatically when more space is needed. This ensures space is used more effectively and allocated where necessary, all the while reducing both out-of-space errors and the time you need to manually monitor your space. And, of course, all of this can be monitored and managed through OpenAdmin tool for Informix.